Bayou's Horrifying Secret, Part 4. The lights at Terrace's were still on when we pulled up, the house seeming smaller and more vulnerable than before. The thought of delivering this blow to her made my stomach churn. With one last glance at Asher, I stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching under my boots. Therese had told us to update her with any news we had as soon as we found out, even if it was in the middle of the night. The door creaked open before we even had a chance to knock, Therese's anxious face peering out at us. "Did y'all find anything?" she asked immediately, her voice filled with a desperate hope that hurt to witness. We told her everything, from Gabby's secret relationship with Lucien to the unexpected pregnancy and the mysterious stranger called Lupin. The reaction was heart-rending. She looked as though we had physically hit her, her hand flying to her chest as her eyes welled up with tears. "My baby girl," she whispered, her voice breaking. After explaining everything to Therese, the air grew thick with sorrow and unease. Ash suggested, maybe we should rent a motel nearby to carry on our investigation. It'll be less intrusive for you. But Therese, wiping her eyes, adamantly refused. "No, I won't hear of it. You're doing so much for Gabby. The least you can do is stay here." We tried to object, but she was insistent, even going as far as offering her own bed. "You both need a proper rest," she said with a shaky voice. "We can't take your bed, Therese," I replied firmly. In the end, we compromised. The couch, though not the coziest option, became our resting place for the night. The day had been long and filled with twists, and as the night deepened, the promise of tomorrow's search loomed. Morning sunlight filtered through the worn-out drapes of the living room. The night before was a blur of thoughts, theories, and restlessness. As I sipped the coffee Therese had kindly made, I couldn't help but replay Remy's words in my head. Young people going missing in the Bayou. Ash had already set up a temporary workstation on Therese's dining table, sorting through newspaper clippings, police reports, and online forums. "We should start by pulling up missing person records," I suggested, joining him. We started sifting through the mountain of data available on missing persons from the past decade in the Acadiana region. Ash's fingers flew over the laptop's keys while I pored over the physical files, connecting dots and drawing lines between cases. Soon, the table was filled with stacks of printed reports and photographs, a grim mosaic of young women who had seemingly vanished into the thick miasma of the bayous. We created a timeline of disappearances. It was a gruesome puzzle, but one that was starting to make sense. Our research unearthed similar stories from Evangeline to Acadia Parish. There was an undeniable pattern: young women in desperate straits disappearing without a trace, only to be found, if at all, weeks or months later, their remains too mutilated to provide any substantial forensic evidence. One of the earliest cases we stumbled upon was that of a young woman named Lila Deschamps from Lafayette, who disappeared in 2012. She was a pregnant teen, abandoned by her family and seeking refuge wherever she could. Her diary was found on the banks of the Bayou Teche with its pages soaked, the ink smeared, and her hopes and fears nearly washed away. 2 weeks after her disappearance, a fisherman came upon her body, drifting among the water hyacinths, her skin marred beyond recognition by the teeth and claws of scavengers. Then there was the heart-wrenching 2015 case of Daisy Fontenot, a 20-year-old sex worker trying to make enough money to escape the clutches of her abusive boyfriend. Her last known location was on the outskirts of St. Landry Parish. She had called her younger sister, telling her about a new client who seemed oddly familiar. That was the last anyone heard from her. 3 weeks later, a group of children playing near the bayou stumbled upon a washed-out purse with Daisy's ID. Her remains were found deeper in the marshes, making it impossible for the coroners to piece together the events leading up to her death. Sophie Broussard's case from 2 years later was one of the most mysterious. A 16-year-old runaway from Evangeline Parish, Sophie was always on the move, relying on the kindness of strangers. Locals in the town of Ville Platte remember seeing her hitchhiking on a cold evening, her breath forming tiny clouds as she waved down passing cars. Not long after, pieces of her clothing were found strung up in the trees, almost ritualistically. Her body, when found, was so disfigured by wildlife that her identity was confirmed only through dental records. Our work stretched for hours, the silent hum of the overhead fan providing the only semblance of background noise in Therese's dining room. The more we unearthed, the more chilling the scenario became. I could feel the weight of every young woman's story pressing on us, heavy and demanding to be told. The pieces began to come together, each one forming a pattern that became harder to ignore. As Ash and I cross-referenced the cases, their similarities started to jump out at us. Not only were all these women marginalized and vulnerable, but they all vanished in the same geographical region. While some bodies were found, others remained undiscovered, their stories written off as tragic tales of individuals who got lost or met with unfortunate accidents. Look at this," Ash murmured, pulling up a digital map and pinning locations of each disappearance. A chilling formation appeared, a rough circle encompassing the bayous, with its center oddly barren of any known disappearances. We've been so focused on the individual stories, the heartbreak, we didn't see the bigger picture, he said, the gravity of our discovery evident in his eyes. I spread out photographs of the victims, the lost souls looking back at us. They had been taken from this world too soon, their dreams and aspirations cruelly snuffed out. "Do you realize what this means, Ash?" I whispered, though I was sure he had come to the same disturbing conclusion. "We have an active serial killer," he responded, voice filled with dread. The word serial killer hung heavy in the air, a suffocating weight, one who's been operating under the radar for at least a decade. I felt a chill down my spine. The weight of the realization was overwhelming. Not just the deaths, but the sheer number of them. 24 victims, I whispered, the magnitude of it hitting me, at least. As we continued to delve into the cases, we saw a progression, an evolution in his modus operandi. It began subtly. The early victims, like Lila, were found in areas where they could be easily discovered, almost as if the killer was still hesitant, still unsure. As the years progressed, the locations of the dumped remains became more secluded, hidden deeper in the swamps, making them harder to find and connect. But what was even more disturbing was his increasing audacity. He began to leave tokens that seemed utterly random. A locket, a bracelet, a scrap of fabric. It was as though he was intentionally leaving us breadcrumbs. "This is sick," Ash muttered, frustration evident in his voice. "He's toying with the families and the police." I nodded, pulling out a file that had caught my eye earlier. It was the case of Elise Martel, a college student from Lafayette who had vanished 6 months before Gabby. The circumstances were eerily similar. Elise, like Gabby, was in the vulnerable phase of her life, struggling to find her footing after a tumultuous relationship and falling into drug abuse. Her last known contact was a voicemail sent to her mother's cell phone, which was received 2 days after she was reported missing. In the distorted, static-filled message, Elise's voice could be faintly heard, her tone hauntingly calm.
"Mom, remember the song you used to sing to me when I was scared? I need to hear it now."
It sent chills down my spine. There was a pregnant pause at the end, a breath, perhaps a whisper, but it was too garbled to make out any clear words. It was as if the killer had allowed, perhaps even forced, Elise to send this message playing with the emotions of her loved ones, leaving them with the chilling memory of her voice. Ash played the recording again, adjusting the audio settings on his laptop. The chilling message replayed, and this time in the background he isolated a soft, mocking laughter. The killer was there listening, savoring the pain he was inflicting. "It's a power trip for him," I murmured. "He gets a thrill out of letting them call home, knowing the agony it causes. He's not just satisfied with taking their lives. He wants to leave a lasting scar on the families, too." As the hours dragged on, a nagging feeling gnawed at the back of my mind. We were missing something. It was like a puzzle piece that was right in front of us, but remained unnoticed. I flipped through the files, each face a testament to the heinous acts of this twisted individual. Then my eyes settled on Lila Deschamps' case once again. I pulled out the photographs from her file, and one, in particular, made me pause. A tarnished silver locket, partially open, resting beside her diary, on the banks of the Bayou Teche. My heart raced. The design on the locket, a delicate engraving of a willow tree, was achingly familiar. The realization hit me like a sledgehammer. I'd seen this locket before. Breathing heavily, the room seemed to close in on me. A flood of memories washed over me. The sense of foreboding and dread that had been whispering at the edges of my consciousness since we began this investigation threatened to drown me. Ash noticed my distress. "Rain, what is it?" he asked, concern evident in his eyes. Without uttering a word, I bolted from the room, the shock in Asher's voice as he called out to me. Outside, the night air hit my face, but it did little to quench the growing panic. I fumbled for my keys and unlocked the SUV, rummaging through the boxes of cold cases I'd brought along. I needed to confirm what I was thinking, what I was feeling. With trembling hands, I pulled out a dusty, worn-out folder labeled Claire Lusion. This was a case that had haunted my dreams and waking moments for over 10 years. Claire was a vivacious 16-year-old from my hometown of Pierre Part. The memories of her disappearance were etched into my mind, her face forever frozen in time as the girl with bright eyes and a future full of potential. I had been a rookie cop back then, fresh out of the academy. Claire's case was my introduction to the harsh realities of the job. Her body was found weeks after her disappearance, lying among the dense foliage of the Bayou, horribly mauled by scavengers. The official report suggested she might have run away and met with a tragic accident, but I never believed that story. Something felt off. Something was amiss. The faded notes written in my then neat handwriting were a testimony to the countless hours I had spent on the case. It was an obsession of mine, long before I had become a jaded detective, long before the weight of the world had fully settled on my shoulders. Within the detailed notes, my scribblings became more erratic, showcasing the frustration and helplessness I felt during the investigation. I had documented every lead, no matter how small, and every interview with her friends and family, but the ones that stood out the most were forensic reports. I flipped to the report from the day her remains were discovered. There, in the meticulous handwriting of the coroner, was a note about fur found intertwined with her clothes and tangled in her hair. Forensic analysis had determined it to be wolf fur. The town was no stranger to wildlife, but wolves were rare, making the finding unusual. Adjacent to the coroner's note was a hastily sketched map indicating where Claire's belongings were discovered. Her backpack was found just a short distance away from her body, lying half submerged in a muddy puddle, the contents strewn around it. But the most eerie discovery was a waterlogged Polaroid that had been carefully stored in a waterproof pouch. It was believed to be the last photo taken of Claire. I pulled the reproduction of the photo from the folder, the image still capable of turning my veins ice cold. Claire stood alone in the bayou, her expression a stark contrast to the beautiful, natural backdrop. Her once radiant eyes were now wide with fear, the bright gray hue dulled by the horror, pleading for help. Her disheveled brunette hair was wild and tangled, as though she had been running or struggling. Her mouth was slightly agape, lips quivering as if she had been screaming moments before the picture was taken. But what truly added a layer of unease was the shadow cast behind her, elongated and distorted, a sinister presence lurking just out of frame. The shape was undoubtedly that of a person, presumably the one who had taken the picture, her killer. The haunting photograph left me breathless, but as I looked closer, I recalled more discrepancies that made my heart race faster. Claire was dressed in a simple black dress, its delicate lace contrasting sharply against the oppressive backdrop of the bayou. But according to testimonies from her family, Claire had never owned a dress like that. Why was she wearing it, and where had it come from? However, the most important detail was the absence of the locket around her neck, a treasured gift from her sister. Claire never took it off. It was her safety net, her connection to family, even when she was away from them. With a shaky hand, I compared the photo of Claire's locket, which had been documented in her belongings list, to the photo of Lila's locket. It was a match. The intricate design of the willow tree, the small dent on the bottom right, everything. This wasn't just a coincidence. Claire Lusion was one of Lupin's earliest victims. Suddenly, all those seemingly random trinkets made sense. I realized they all belonged to previous victims, trophies displayed with the new victims as a taunt, a cruel game he played with investigators. My chest tightened and the world seemed to blur around me. Realization crashed down in waves as the past and present collided. The file in my hand felt heavy, the weight of Claire's memory bearing down on me. My breaths came in short, ragged bursts as the looming feeling of dread threatened to consume me. My senses tingled with unease. I felt a palpable sensation of being observed. With the case files scattered around me, I scrambled to turn on the flashlight I always kept in the glove compartment. The strong beam cut through the darkness, casting eerie shadows over the thick, swampy trees and water's edge. The bayou at night was a symphony of crickets, frogs, and the occasional splash, but it had fallen, eerily silent. I slowly moved the beam, methodically scanning the area, trying to spot anything out of place. Then my light caught a figure. At the edge of the bayou, someone, appeared to be crouched down, moving unnaturally on all fours. It looked like a man, but the way he moved was more animal than human. He was draped in what appeared to be a large fur coat, which seemed to merge and camouflage with the surrounding vegetation. But the most chilling sight were the eyes. They gleamed, reflecting my flashlight beam in an almost predatory manner. For a brief moment, our gazes locked, and the very atmosphere seemed to freeze. "Lupin!" I shouted, trying to mask the tremor in my voice. Instead of responding, the figure let out a guttural sound somewhere between a growl and a laugh. And then, with a speed that was deeply unsettling, he turned and bolted further into the bayou. Without thinking, I drew my pistol from its holster and sprinted after him. The dense undergrowth scratched against my skin as I pushed through, my boots sinking into the mud with each step. The flashlight in my left hand bounced wildly, creating an ever-shifting play of light and shadow ahead. The figure remained just out of reach, a fleeting shadow darting between trees. His movements were so erratic that it felt like chasing a phantom. With every rustle, splash, or snap of a twig, my heart raced faster, adrenaline pumping through my veins. Suddenly, the ground gave way beneath me. I tumbled down, splashing into the stagnant waters of the bayou. I tried to regain my footing, but the sludgy water and mud hindered my movement. My pistol slipped from my grasp, disappearing into the murk. My flashlight, however, remained in my hand, its beam now pointed upwards, casting the trees in a ghostly light. The beam skimmed the murky water, revealing what appeared to be a human form floating on the surface. Panic welled up inside me, the water around me growing colder, and for a split second, I was convinced it was Gabby's lifeless body. But as the light steadied, the grim reality took a different form. Instead of human flesh, I saw the unmistakable scaly hide of an alligator, its underbelly exposed to the night. The creature had been savagely disemboweled, its underbelly torn open, spilling its viscera into the murky waters. The light from my flashlight danced erratically as I tried to gain control over my racing heart. The grotesque sight of the alligator had already shaken me, but what truly stole my breath was the hint of something caught in its mangled jaws. Reaching forward cautiously, my fingers brushed against a soft, silken strand. With trembling hands, I pulled out a lock of chestnut hair, unmistakably Gabby's, bound tightly with a taut violin string. The metallic scent of blood mingled with the musty odor of the bayou, clouding my senses. Lost in my thoughts, I barely registered the firm grip on my arm until I was yanked upwards. For a split second, panic seized me, and my mind imagined the worst. However, the familiar, concerned face of Ash greeted me. He hauled me out of the muck, his eyes wide with a mix of relief and alarm. "Rain, what the hell were you thinking running off like that?" His voice was tense, but his grip was steady. But before I could respond, an eerie silence enveloped the bayou, broken only by the soft, chilling sobs of Therese, who had arrived on the scene. Her eyes widened in terror as she took in the grisly scene before her. Me, covered head to toe in thick mud and blood, clutching a strand of what she instantly recognized as her daughter's hair. Her face turned deathly pale, eyes bulging in a silent scream. "Mon Dieu, je vous en supplie, no, non." "My God, I beg you, no," she murmured, voice barely above a whisper, disbelief etched into every word. The quiet Bayou was pierced by a heartbreaking scream as she crumpled to the ground, the weight of the evidence in my hand hitting her like a tidal wave. Time seemed to stretch, and everything became a disorienting haze. The world around me muffled, and the weight of the moment bore down on me, making it hard to breathe. My vision tunneled, focusing solely on Therese's tear-streaked face. I could distantly hear her anguished sobs broken up by desperate prayers in French, each word heavy with pain. Ash quickly moved to her side, wrapping an arm around her shoulders, trying to offer solace in a situation that defied understanding. A heavy dread settled in my gut. Was Gabby still alive? Or had I just discovered the last remnant of her existence? To be continued in part 5.